Welcome to the Why Factor, a chance to work out why we do what we do. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
How can we harness our collective energy? What if our technology serves us today and tomorrow? Let's champion the energy transformation. Discover how at SiemensEnergy.com.
Thanks for downloading this edition of The Why Factor, a programme that seeks to find out why we do the things we do. I hope you enjoy it.
I regret fighting so much with my sister when we were growing up and making our parents' lives a misery.
I regret not trying harder in college and sleeping with nearly 50 people.
I regret caring what people think.
I regret not getting help for my anxiety.
I regret cheating on you, lying to you. I was so selfish and now I'm paying.
I regret living my life in fear of what might go wrong.
So many regrets. So damn many.
BBC World Service, I'm Mike Williams with The Why Factor. Today, regret. What is it? Why do we feel it?
I was looking after people who had gone home to die, so I was beside their beds for the last 6 to 12 weeks of their life, for 12 hours a day.
Bronnie Ware was a palliative care nurse in Australia, and she's the author of a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying.
My role ended up becoming more of a listener than anything else, so it was company for the dying people as their life wound down. One of the most beautiful things I discovered was that once you are dying, there's really no room for small talk or nonsense, and so the relationships and the discussions that unfolded between myself and my patients were so honest and raw from the start because we were on limited time, so there was just no time wasted. Over the course of 8 years, a lot of common themes kept coming up, and I realised over time that there were actually 5 regrets that sort of summarised the regrets that people were sharing with me, and the pain of those regrets that people took to the end, to their deathbed, was so huge and enormous that I knew that I didn't want to end up in the same position myself. Three-quarters of the people I looked after had a regret of one form or another, had reflections where they wished they'd done things differently. When I considered all of the regrets that had been shared with me, they all fit within those 5. They came from different angles at times, but they all fit within those 5. The first one, so the most common one, was people wishing that they'd had the courage to live a life true to themselves, not the life that other people expected of them. Those expectations could have come from family, from friends, peers, and from society, but people realising that they had shaped their life according to other people's expectations, not according to what their heart actually wanted them to do, and that was so common. It was awful. There were many powerful conversations in all of those years, but the most powerful I had was with a beautiful woman called Grace. She's from the generation where you don't get divorced, and from a culture where you don't get divorced. And her marriage had been incredibly unhappy all the way through. She had lived in a very unbalanced relationship where she was dominated for over 50 years. And she dreamed of travelling around Australia. She had quite a few dreams. But then her husband became ill and went into a nursing home. And for a brief moment she thought, OK, I can honour some of these dreams now, or at least one of them, and do some travelling. And within 3 weeks of him becoming a resident in the nursing home, she was diagnosed with terminal illness, and it was very aggressive. She held my hand so tightly one day, squeezing it till it hurt, and said to me, "Don't you dare ever have this regret. Promise me now, promise this dying lady that you're going to live a courageous life." And we were both crying at the time, and I did. I promised her, and I said, I'll always honour you and find the courage to do that.
I regret that abortion when I was 16.
I regret staying in college. I should have dropped out during the second or third year, or maybe not gone at all.
I regret being born into my own family.
My name is Tom Gilovich. I'm a professor of psychology at Cornell University.
What is regret? What makes it different from any other negative emotion?
Well, it's a more cognitively oriented emotion, and you might think of it as like a cognitive controller over a set of emotions, that you have certain kinds of regrets that can produce a variety of different emotions, sometimes anger, sometimes shame, sometimes guilt, etc. So it's almost a conduit of other emotions, and it's very cognitively driven. People tend to regret things that they feel responsible for. You know, you could wish that you had a larger family, had another brother, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, I regret I didn't have a brother." But if you ask people to talk about their biggest regrets, they almost always name things that were in their control.
I regret not practicing the piano when I had the chance.
I told my grandmother I'd visit her in hospital, but I kept putting it off. And then she died.
I regret not talking to a friend I had for many years.
I regret calling my brother retarded and making jabs at him for his mental disability. I ruined him.
I regret every choice I've ever made.
The second most common was people wishing they hadn't worked so hard, and it wasn't about not loving your work, but it's about keeping balance for other aspects of life. There's other areas of our lives that deserve just as much attention, and it's about making very conscious choices, even if they're only very small steps, but small decisions on a daily basis towards honouring other parts of our lives as well.
I have lots of regrets, yeah. But I try not to be paralyzed by them.
I'm guessing you don't want to share them with me. We don't know each other very well.
Right. I'd prefer not to.
Do they trouble you?
Yes, they do, yes. I'm Jay Wallace, and I am a moral philosopher, and I teach philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley. The impersonal regret just takes as its object some past state of affairs that might not have involved your agency at all. I read about in the newspaper maybe an earthquake in some remote part of the world, and I might intelligibly regret that happened, regret the loss of life that occurred. That has nothing to do with me. My agency is not involved in that in any way. But there are other cases where, I regret not just things that happened to me, but more specifically, things that I did. I think regret has a very important place in your life, giving expression to your awareness of the values that you yourself have damaged in some way.
So the third regret was people wishing they'd had the courage to express their feelings, to be honest with their feelings. And in some cases it was people wishing that they could tell their adult children that they loved them, that they were proud of them, or their partners or friends, where the channels weren't open enough for such honest and raw communication. That was a common part of this regret. But another part was also people realising they hadn't spoken up in their own defence and hadn't treated themselves with enough kindness. But either way, it was wishing that they'd had the courage to express their feelings and not hold them in.
My name is Kevin Hansen, and I'm the creator of the SecretRegrets.com website, where people can go online and confess the biggest regret of their life that they've held as a secret. It just kind of met a need out there in the world that so many people were holding on to these deep, dark regrets and didn't have a place where they felt safe to release them. They didn't have anyone that they could trust to talk about them, and they were just holding on to them. And finally, they found a place where they felt they could get these things off of their chest, and people just started to pour out and just speak so honestly and so raw and with so much emotion about these things that they just held inside for so long.
I regret letting you break me.
I regret not having an affair when I had the chance. My wife did years later, and now I'm left to deal with the consequences.
I regret cheating on you, lying to you. I was so selfish, and now
I regret holding on to you for so long.
The biggest common theme that I see involves relationships. And it's really relationships of all kinds. You know, people regret staying in romantic relationships, they regret leaving relationships, and they regret not pursuing relationships that maybe they should have. I just see a lot of those types of things. People are questioning their decisions all the time.
So the fourth one was people wishing that they'd stayed in touch with their friends, and it was surprisingly common how often this came up. What I came to witness was that when someone's dying, the family often go into grief in the presence of the person who's dying, and the person who's dying actually wants to live for as long as they can and as fully as they can, even though they're still dying. So they want joy brought into their sickbed, and they want stories of the past and reminiscing, and they want laughter, and they want to hear that the birds are singing outside. They want to know what's going on outside. They don't want to stop living until their body stops breathing. But in some cases, the grief the family were experiencing was often quite a huge responsibility for the dying person, because they cared about their family's feelings and well-being. So friends could then come in, and friends who often shared long-term memories that surpassed when the adult children came into the dying person's life, and they would tell stories and just have a completely different relationship. And I found that those relationships actually created such rich joy for dying people.
Regret is more common the older people get, at least stable regrets.
Psychologist Professor Tom Gilovich.
And the kinds of things that people say is, I wish I had taken my studies more seriously. I wish I had taken more studies, that is, stayed in school longer. Wish I had learned to speak a foreign language, play a musical instrument. Wish I had married the one who got away. All sorts of things. So what you see is, in the short term, people regret actions much more than inactions. But if you ask people, look back on your life, what are the things that you regret? They report regretting their inactions more. And why that is, I think, is an interesting psychological story. Most of those mistakes of inaction have to do with what you might call self-actualization. Oh, I wish I had pursued this career rather than that career. I'd be wealthier or more satisfied as a result. I wish I had married this person rather than that person. I'd be happier. And we thought that the West, the United States in particular, really celebrates self-actualization. So we thought these motivations and this tendency to regret inaction more would be particularly pronounced in the West. may not be as strong in the East, where notions of duty and honor and connection to others is emphasized more than it is here in the West. And therefore, regrets that result from those mistakes of action would just be harder to deal with, and therefore people in, let's say, East Asian cultures would be more prone to action regrets. Seemed like a perfectly reasonable hypothesis to us. We were pretty optimistic about doing that cross-cultural research. Found absolutely no evidence for it. To the same level as in the West, people by a 3-to-1 margin report more regrets of inaction than regrets of action.
Some people seem to be tormented by regret, and others, well, not at all.
Yes. And I think those are both unhealthy extremes. You want to find a middle way. I mean, you don't want to be tormented and not able to move forward. But the person who's never subject to regrets or can never admit that they've done something that's worthy of regret seems to me equally frightening. But in all of its manifestations, it can also be paralyzing, and it can prevent people from getting on with their lives or lead them to be consumed with hatred of the person who's wronged them, or some ways, in kind of alarming ways as well.
The fifth regret was patients wishing that they'd let themselves be happier. In too many cases, people had not allowed themselves full happiness because they believed what other people had said to them, that they didn't deserve it, that they were hopeless, or just the conditioning. So a lot of people actually realised that life had been a choice and that they hadn't exercised those choices as consciously as they could, and that they could have actually made choices towards happiness. It's not about denying all the other emotions that we experience, but they had a choice in how long they wallowed in the sadness or how much power they gave to the feelings that were holding them back.
Thanks for listening to The Why Factor. I'm Mike Williams, and the producer is Ben Crichton. If you've enjoyed this edition, you may be interested in others, such as our examination of revenge or our programme on nostalgia. You'll find those and many more on the website. And we'd love to hear your views on the programme and your ideas for future topics. You can reach us at yfactor@bbc.com.
You know, if we think of it in connection to love and attachment, you don't get the highs without the lows. I think most of us would find our lives incredibly impoverished if there weren't people that we loved. That goes together with moments of exhilaration and profound shared experience and so on, but you can't have those, I think, without some susceptibility to grief and to regret. So, yeah, in that way, it is the price we pay, I think, for the things that make our lives worth living in the first place.
Thanks for listening to The Why Factor. If you'd like to hear more episodes, do visit the website bbcworldservice.com/yfactor.